Hello, Authority Gap listeners, and welcome to the Authority Gap podcast, the AI-hosted companion series for consulting firm founders and B2B expert-led service firms that want to become easier for buyers to understand, trust, recommend, and choose. In this episode, we're asking the big question behind the book, is authority built or earned? And here's the question. If authority has to be real, can a firm still build it intentionally?
Welcome to the debate. We are taking this flagship discussion to really synthesize the core arguments of the source material. We're looking at that fundamental tension between, possessing expertise internally and actually translating that expertise to the market externally.
And it is a profound tension. I mean, it's one that keeps highly capable firm leaders up at night. But, I will be taking the position that real authority must be strictly earned over time. It's the natural byproduct of deep expertise, flawless delivery, and just a compounding reputation.
Right, the organic approach.
Exactly. I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because when a firm attempts to artificially engineer or build authority, it almost inevitably leads them toward manufactured posturing. It's empty visibility, and it's the kind of fake thought leadership that sophisticated B2B buyers see right through. Authority, in my view, is just the gravity of your past work pulling future clients toward you. You simply cannot manufacture that on a whiteboard.
Well, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. I think pitting built against earned is fundamentally a false choice. We are not talking about faking anything here. Authority absolutely must be earned and grounded in real, substantive expertise. I can see that entirely.
Okay, good.
But that real expertise still has to be intentionally built into something visible, something understandable, credible, and defensible. If a firm does not actively close the gap between its internal capability and the external confidence of the buyer, well, that firm will just continue to lose 6- and 7-figure deals to lesser competitors, and simply because those competitors were easier for the buyer to understand.
Yeah, I hear you, but the best firms simply do not need to shout. When we look at the empirical reality of the market, firms that try to deliberately build authority almost always fall into what the material calls the visibility trap.
The visibility trap is real, yes, but it's a symptom of doing it wrong, not a reason to avoid doing it entirely.
But it's what happens 90% of the time. They confuse marketing activity with actual buyer movement. They churn out daily content, they optimize their LinkedIn profiles, they send out automated connection requests.
The spam?
Exactly, the spam. And they aren't actually increasing their authority. They are just increasing the ambient noise in their industry. If you're a founder listening to this, you probably know exactly what I mean. You see your competitors posting generic drivel and you think, I don't want to be that. If a firm's expertise is genuinely world-class, the market will eventually recognize it. The sheer weight of their delivery will speak for itself. Trying to engineer that process is just a distraction from doing the actual difficult work of solving complex client problems.
Yeah, but again, the core thesis we are examining explicitly points out that the firms most hurt by the authority gap are often already good enough to win. Their problem is not a lack of capability, it is a translation problem. You say the work speaks for itself, but, work is mute.
It speaks through referrals, though. It speaks through client retention.
To a highly limited radius of people who already know you, sure, but let me offer an analogy to explain why this whole expertise speaks for itself idea fails in the broader market. Imagine handing a crisp, newly minted $100 bill to an alien visiting planet Earth for the first time.
Okay, an alien, I'm tracking.
To that alien, it is just a printed piece of paper with a face on it. It has zero value. Why? Because the alien lacks the context of our economic system, the concept of currency exchange, and the shared societal agreement of trust.
So, the buyer is the alien in this scenario.
Exactly. A consulting firm's expertise is just paper to a prospective buyer unless that firm intentionally builds the narrative and the validation required for the buyer to recognize its value. Expertise is what you possess internally, but authority is what buyers can recognize externally. You have to build the bridge between the two. You can't just stand on your side of the river holding a $100 bill and expect the buyer to magically know what it's worth.
Okay, but let's look at the mechanics of building that bridge. If we are testing whether authority can truly be built intentionally without decaying into something fake, we have to look at the source materials ecosystem, what they call the 5 authority pillars.
Let's do it.
You claim these are necessary translations of earned expertise. I look at them and see a high risk of superficial marketing tactics.
They are only superficial if the underlying expertise is hollow.
Well, let's test that with the foundation, the brand. My stance is that a brand should strictly be the organic, retrospective reflection of a firm's history. When a firm sits in a boardroom and decides they need to intentionally build a brand, what happens? They invariably strip away all their nuance to sound big.
Right. They generalize.
Yeah, they land on broad generic positioning. They claim to do strategy and transformation or innovation and growth. It just becomes corporate sludge. Real brand is just the echo of the work you have already done, not a narrative you invent to attract the work you want.
But intentionally building a brand isn't about inventing a fictional narrative or adopting corporate sludge. It is exactly the opposite. It is about establishing a highly specific authority lane.
An authority lane. Explain how that isn't just a marketing buzzword for niche.
Because it's rooted in cognitive psychology, specifically how buyers process risk. Buyers evaluate fragments of your firm over time. A website headline here, a passing referral there, maybe a single case study they stumbled across. From those fragments, they form what the material calls an invisible shortlist, long before your firm even knows there's an opportunity on the table.
So they are quietly evaluating you before they reach out.
Precisely. The buying journey starts in the dark. If you do not intentionally build a narrative that tells the buyer exactly what problem you solve, who you solve it for, and why your perspective matters, buyers will still categorize you, but they will categorize you incorrectly. Cognitive load is high, buyers are busy. If you are vague, they will use the easiest available mental heuristic.
So effectively reducing your highly specialized, rigorous expertise into a generic vendor label, like, oh, they're just another IT firm.
Right. And you will lose a $500,000 engagement you absolutely should have won simply because you were too hard to place in the buyer's mental map. The intentionality behind brand isn't about polish or looking bigger than you are. It is about giving the buyer a crystal clear frame of meaning so they don't have to guess what you do.
Okay, let's say I concede that you must actively define your authority lane so you aren't mentally misfiled. Claiming a lane is easy. Anyone can put digital supply chain experts on their homepage. This brings us to the friction point of content, and I have deep skepticism about content as an intentional authority building tool. We are drowning in a sea of firms churning out empty thought leadership just to look busy.
The arms race of generic insights.
Exactly. It's an arms race that adds zero net new knowledge to the industry. You have brilliant consultants being told to write blog posts about the future of AI that read like they were written by a high schooler. Again, I return to my premise. Good work should speak for itself. How do you possibly separate intentional content building from just contributing to the endless market noise? If the expertise is real, it resides in the minds of the partners and the outcomes of the clients, not in a weekly newsletter.
It separates itself through the mechanism of visible thinking. Content, in the context of true authority architecture, is not about volume. It is not about maintaining a relentless publishing schedule to appease an algorithm. It is about making your judgment and your methodology observable to the market.
Observable judgment. What does that actually look like in practice, though?
It looks like proof. Expertise requires validation. Look at it from the buyer's perspective. They are about to put their career capital on the line to hire you. If the engagement goes south, well, it's their neck on the block. They need to see how your thinking works before they take that risk. They need to sample your intellectual rigor.
So instead of an article stating that supply chains are broken, you publish the proprietary diagnostic framework you use to find the leaks in the supply chain.
Yes, you use case evidence, deep dive diagnostics, and operational frameworks not to shout for attention, but to definitively prove the authority lane you just claimed. If the brand is the claim, content is the evidence. If you just say you are an expert, that is a claim. If you show me the exact mental model you use to solve a problem I'm currently facing, that is visible thinking. It allows the buyer to recognize your pattern recognition before they ever sign a contract.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. Because producing that level of visible thinking takes immense effort. And if no one sees it, it's a waste of time, which inevitably leads firms to push for visibility. But here is where we hit the visibility trap. The source material explicitly warns that more visibility does not automatically create demand.
It warns against visibility without validation, yes.
Right, but what happens in reality? A firm gets a little bit of funding or a founder gets antsy and they just engineer visibility. They buy ads, they appear on every random industry panel, they spam social media. All this does is amplify their noise. In fact, if the underlying expertise or narrative is weak, if they haven't done the rigorous work of visible thinking we just discussed, more visibility merely exposes their lack of earned credibility to a wider audience. Visibility without earned substance is a massive liability.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that you are describing an architectural failure, not a conceptual one? I completely agree that exposing mediocrity at scale is a terrible business strategy, but that doesn't mean visibility itself is wrong. It means the sequencing is wrong.
Explain the sequencing.
The material outlines a very specific architecture. Narrative first, then validation, then visibility. You must intentionally build visibility only after you have earned the expertise and validated it through visible thinking. Visibility does not create authority out of thin air. It makes existing authority recognizable to more of the right people.
But why force it? I mean, if the thinking is that good, won't it spread organically?
Because high-trust B2B buyers do not form confidence based on a single organic interaction. They are risk-averse. They need to repeatedly encounter the right signals in the right contexts, over time. Visibility ensures that your validated expertise becomes mentally available to the buyer before their exact moment of need arises. It's not about being everywhere and annoying people. It's about being consistently recognizable to a highly specific group of people.
I can accept that visibility amplifies validated truth, but this logical chain starts to break down for me when we apply it to pipeline. This is where the tension between earned and engineered becomes highly practical. I argue that pipeline, actual sales opportunities, should be earned naturally through referrals, repeat business, and organic reputation.
Relying solely on referrals is a dangerous game, though. It's completely out of your control, perhaps. But when firms try to deliberately build pipeline through engineered outreach sequences, it is almost always just disguised cold calling. And cold calling actively damages true authority. It positions the firm as a supplicant, begging for attention, rather than an elite expert whose time is inherently valuable. Think about how you feel when a generic pitch lands in your inbox. It instantly diminishes the sender's credibility. If you have real authority, the market comes to you.
I come at it from a different way. You are assuming that outreach is happening in a vacuum, which is why it feels like cold calling. Let me introduce the concept of deal mechanics, which maps the natural sequence of how a buyer engages: signal, then conversation, then decision. Pipeline generation isn't about spamming cold lists. It is about translating market recognition into right-fit conversations.
But practically, outreach is still you interrupting their day, only if they have no idea who you are. Remember the data in the source material comparing Company A and Company B? Company A acted like the firm you are afraid of. They sent out 10,000 broad connection requests, got 2,500 accepted, and generated 0 meaningful leads. That is the activity trap. That is the supplicant behavior you rightly criticize.
Exactly. It's embarrassing for a supposed expert firm to act that way.
But look at Company B. Company B only sent 1,000 requests. They had 300 accepted, but they generated over 75 highly qualified leads. Why the massive difference in conversion? Because Company B had intentionally built the earlier pillars. They had a clear authority lane. They had published visible thinking. They had engineered targeted visibility. So when they reached out, it did not feel cold to the buyer.
Because the context asymmetry was resolved. The buyer already knew them.
Yes, the buyer already had context, relevance, and confidence based on the firm's visible thinking. Pipeline, when built correctly, is simply the bridge between market recognition and an active conversation. You are just inviting someone who already respects your thinking to have a dialogue. That is not supplicant behavior, that is peer-to-peer engagement.
All right, let's assume you've navigated that perfectly. The buyer respects your visible thinking, they take the meeting, and you are now in the conversation. That brings us to conversion. And I will argue quite strongly that if a firm has earned true authority, if their expertise is genuinely undeniable, a great sales conversation with a buyer will naturally close the deal.
Wait, you think the room is enough?
I think the expertise in the room is enough. The depth of the diagnostic questioning, the sheer weight of the consultant's insight during that live interaction, the trust built eye to eye, that should be entirely sufficient. If you need a complex conversion architecture to close a deal after a phenomenal conversation, well, your expertise wasn't as convincing as you thought it was.
That logic has a fatal flaw, and it is perhaps the most dangerous assumption a highly skilled consulting firm can make. It completely ignores the reality of internal justification.
Internal justification? You mean the bureaucracy of the client's procurement process?
I mean, with human psychology of risk within a corporate structure, a deal in a complex B2B environment does not close just because a buyer in the room is interested or even deeply persuaded. That buyer, your champion, now has to carry that decision to other stakeholders who were not in the room. They have to go to the leadership team, to finance, to procurement, to internal skeptics.
So you're saying the buyer essentially becomes your salesperson?
Worse, think of your buyer as a defense attorney. When they go to the CFO to get your $200,000 consulting retainer approved, they are on trial. If you just gave them a great vibe and a fascinating conversation in the sales meeting, they have no hard evidence to present to the jury. Your brilliant sales conversation is not portable.
That is a fascinating phrase, not portable.
It isn't. The buyer cannot replicate your exact tone, your nuanced answers to their objections, and your aura of expertise when they are defending the budget request to their CFO a week later. The decision path is incredibly rigorous. The choice must first be explainable, then defensible, and finally approvable.
So if the buyer can't explain exactly how you arrive at your outcomes, the CFO kills the deal. Not because you aren't experts, but because the risk feels undefined.
Precisely. Therefore, a firm must intentionally build conversion assets, clear diagnostic findings, mapped-out methodologies, risk reduction arguments, and highly portable proof points. You build these assets to equip your champion to defend the choice internally. You are not building conversion assets to persuade the buyer. You are building them to protect the buyer from perceived internal risk. If you don't engineer that intentional safety net, you will lose the deal to a safe legacy brand that the CFO already knows, even if your expertise is vastly superior.
If we look at the entire system you've laid out, from establishing an authority lane so you aren't misfiled, to validating it with visible thinking, to amplifying it with targeted visibility, generating pipeline through context rather than cold spam, and finally equipping the defense attorney buyer for internal justification, it is a highly cohesive model. You've clearly shown that intentionally building authority isn't about manufacturing a fake persona, it's about translating real value.
It is a translation engine. Nothing more, nothing less.
However, I must maintain my core foundational position. Authority must ultimately be grounded in real, hard-earned expertise. No amount of carefully engineered architecture, no perfectly calibrated deal mechanics, and no beautifully designed conversion assets can save a firm that fundamentally lacks substance. If the delivery fails, if the insights are shallow, the entire system collapses under its own weight. The danger of treating authority as something to be built is that it tempts firms, especially younger firms or those looking for shortcuts, to focus entirely on the scaffolding rather than the building itself.
And on that foundational point, we are in complete agreement. Expertise is the non-negotiable bedrock. Without real substance, the 5 pillars are just an elaborate facade, and the market will eventually tear a facade down. But the tragedy of the market, and the reason this material exists, is that the firms most hurt by the authority gap are the ones who actually have the substance.
Right. They are the quiet experts doing the heavy lifting.
Yes, they are already good enough to win, but they mistakenly believe that their expertise speaks for itself. It doesn't. Expertise still needs narrative, it needs validation, and it needs visibility. Buyers are busy. They are highly risk-averse,
and they are overwhelmed by noise. They desperately need to understand, trust, explain, and defend the firm they choose. Authority can and must be intentionally built without becoming fake, because closing that gap is fundamentally an act of service to the buyer. It reduces their cognitive load and lowers their institutional risk.
We have arrived at a fascinating point of convergence for this flagship discussion. The ultimate takeaway from this material seems to be a synthesis of our two positions. Authority cannot be manufactured out of thin air. It requires the absolute bedrock of earned expertise. But conversely, earned expertise is practically invisible in a crowded market unless it is intentionally translated into a recognizable authority architecture. We leave it to you, our listeners, to evaluate your own firms. Are you relying too heavily on your reputation, forcing your buyers to go to trial without the portable logic they need to defend you? Or are you churning out visibility without the validating substance required to truly earn their trust?
It is the difference between holding a $100 bill and knowing how to translate its value so the rest of the universe can recognize it. If you want to turn your expertise into something buyers can actually see, understand, and trust, take the Custom Authority Gap Prescription Quiz. It takes about 2 minutes, shows you where your authority gaps may be, and gives you the option to participate in a discussion group led by Derek Little, author of The Authority Gap. The Authority Gap is available on Amazon. To get the Authority Gap Reader Preview Kit, including the field guide and preview chapters, visit the book page at trailblazermastery.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.